Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our reading lab. I am your instructor, and today we are going to master one of the most important tasks in the TOEFL reading section, the academic passage. We will look at how to break down complex texts about history and science, identify the author's primary purpose, and spot those tricky details that lead to the right answer. By the end of this lesson, you will feel much more confident navigating academic vocabulary and paragraph structures. Let's dive right in and start analyzing our passage together. If you find these strategies helpful, make sure to subscribe to the My TOEFL channel. We have plenty of lessons coming up to help you reach your target score. So let's keep learning together. The Neolithic Revolution. This title introduces a major historical event. When you see the word revolution, it usually signals a complete and radical change in a system. In this context, the Neolithic period refers to the New Stone Age. Together, these words tell us that the passage will explain a massive turning point in human history, specifically how humans changed their way of life from moving around to staying in one place. We should expect to read about what caused this change and what the results were for human society. The transition from hunter-gatherer societies to settled agriculture, known as the Neolithic Revolution, represents a monumental shift in human history. This opening sentence sets the stage by defining the topic. The author uses the phrase monumental shift to emphasize that this was not a small update, but a huge change. We are looking at a transition, which means a movement from one state to another. Specifically, it is the move from hunter-gatherer societies to farming. This tells us the passage will be about a major before and after scenario in human development. Around 10,000 years ago, various groups began cultivating crops and domesticating animals, which allowed for a significantly more stable food supply than foraging provided. Here, the author provides the how and when of this change. The key actions were cultivating crops and domesticating animals. Why did humans do this? The reason is a significantly more stable food supply. This compares agriculture to the old way, foraging, and highlights the main advantage of the revolution: consistency in eating. This shift was not merely a change in dietary habits, but a fundamental transformation of human social structures. This is a very important sentence for the main idea. The author uses the structure, not merely a change in diet, which suggests that the effects went much deeper. The phrase, fundamental transformation, suggests that every part of how people lived changed, particularly their human social structures. This prepares us to hear about how society reorganized itself. As populations became sedentary, they began to establish permanent settlements, leading to the development of the first villages and eventually towns. In this sentence, we see the first result of staying in one place. The word sedentary is used to describe the people. The effect of being sedentary was the creation of permanent settlements. Notice the progression from first villages to larger towns. This shows how staying in one place allowed human communities to grow in size and complexity. With a consistent surplus of food, not every individual was required to engage in daily food production, facilitating the emergence of specialized labor roles. Paragraph 2 starts with a cause and effect relationship. The cause is a consistent surplus of food, meaning they had more than they needed. The effect is specialized labor roles. Because food was taken care of, people could do other jobs. The author uses the word facilitating to show that the extra food made this new social organization possible. This division of labor led to rapid advancements in technology, such as the invention of pottery for storage and more sophisticated stone tools for efficient farming. This sentence builds on the idea of specialized jobs. The division of labor allowed for rapid advancements in technology. The author gives specific examples like pottery and better tools. This shows how society became more skilled once they weren't just searching for food all day. Furthermore, the accumulation of surplus resources resulted in the beginning of social hierarchies and complex trade systems between different regions. The transition word, furthermore, tells us more consequences are coming. Having extra resources led to social hierarchies, which means some people had more power or status than others. It also created complex trade systems, showing that these settlements were starting to interact with each other over long distances. However, this new lifestyle also introduced significant challenges, including a higher vulnerability to seasonal crop failure and the rapid spread of infectious diseases within more densely populated areas. Now we see a contrast. The word however signals that farming wasn't all good. It brought significant challenges. Two main problems are mentioned: crop failure and infectious diseases. This balance of pros and cons is a classic academic writing style that you will often see on the TOEFL. The long-term impact of agricultural practices on the natural environment was both profound and irreversible. Paragraph 3 moves away from social changes to look at the natural environment. The author calls the impact profound and irreversible. This means the changes were deep and could never be changed back. This sets a serious tone for the final part of the passage. Vast areas of forests were cleared to make room for fields, and early irrigation systems altered the natural flow of water to support thirsty crops. The author provides evidence for the environmental impact. Humans cleared forests and used irrigation systems. By saying these actions altered the natural flow of water, the author shows how humans began to control and change nature to suit their own needs for farming. These environmental modifications allowed human populations to grow exponentially, eventually paving the way for the rise of complex civilizations and major urban centers. This sentence links the environmental changes to population growth. Because humans changed the land, the population could grow exponentially, which means very quickly. This growth led to the rise of complex civilizations. The author is showing us the direct path from the first farm to the first big cities or major urban centers. Today, the legacy of this revolution continues to shape every aspect of modern society, as our global food systems remain deeply rooted in the foundational practices established by these early farmers. The passage concludes by connecting the past to the present. The word legacy refers to the long-lasting impact of the revolution. Our global food systems are still based on those foundational practices from thousands of years ago. It reminds the reader that the Neolithic Revolution is the reason our world looks the way it does today. All right, let's start with our first question. This is a big picture question that asks us to identify the core message of the entire text. Which of the following best states the main idea of the passage? This question wants to find the main idea. To answer this, we need to look at what every paragraph talks about, not just a single detail. We need a summary that includes the social changes and the environmental impact. Remember, for main idea questions, the correct answer must be broad enough to cover the whole passage, but specific enough to be accurate. A common trap is choosing an option that is true, but only covers one small part of the text. Let's take a closer look at option A, the technological differences between stone and metal tools. This option focuses on technological differences regarding stone and metal tools. While paragraph 2 does mention stone tools, metal tools are not even discussed in the text. Furthermore, tools are just one small detail used to support the idea of specialized labor. This is far too narrow and partially inaccurate to be the main idea. Therefore, this choice is incorrect. Now let's take a closer look at option B, the social and environmental changes caused by agriculture. This choice covers both social and environmental changes. Paragraph 1 and 2 focus heavily on the transition to human social structures and specialized labor. Then, paragraph 3 describes the long-term impact on the environment. This option perfectly summarizes the entire scope of the passage, from how we live together to how we change the planet. This option is correct. Next, we'll examine option C, the dietary habits of prehistoric hunter-gatherer societies. This option mentions dietary habits and hunter-gatherer societies. While the text starts by mentioning the transition away from these groups, it is not the focus. The passage is about the Neolithic Revolution, which is the shift away from hunter-gatherers toward agriculture. Choosing this would mean ignoring almost the entire text, so this option is incorrect. Here's option D. Let's break it down. The history of trade between various ancient village settlements. This option mentions the history of trade between village settlements. Although trade systems are mentioned in paragraph 2, they are just one result of the surplus food. The passage covers much more than just trade, such as technology, disease, and environmental clearing. This is another example of a detail trap that is too narrow. This option is incorrect. The correct answer is B, because the key expressions in the text directly match this option. while the other choices either provide incomplete information or clearly contradict the passage. Moving along to the second question. This one is a vocabulary in context question, which checks how well you can use surrounding sentences to find a word's meaning. The word sedentary in paragraph 1 is closest in meaning to. The question asks for the meaning of the word sedentary. In paragraph 1, the text says, populations became sedentary, and then they established permanent settlements. The word permanent is a huge clue here. If you are staying in a permanent place, you are not moving. A good test-taking tip for vocabulary is to replace the target word with each option and see which one keeps the sentence's logic intact. Let's take a closer look at option A, active. The word active means moving around or doing a lot of physical things. While farmers are busy, the context of becoming sedentary is about the location of where people live, not how much they exercise. If they were active in the sense of moving their homes, they wouldn't have permanent settlements. Therefore, this option is incorrect. Let's move on to option B, migratory. The word migratory means moving from one place to another frequently. This is the exact opposite of what the passage describes. The text says humans moved away from being hunter-gatherers, who were migratory, to establish permanent settlements. So, sedentary cannot mean migratory. This option is incorrect. Next, we'll examine option C, stationary. The word stationary means not moving or staying in one place. This fits perfectly with the phrase permanent settlements and the move to live in villages and eventually towns. If you are stationary, you stay where you are, which is exactly what happened during the Neolithic Revolution. This option is correct. Now that we've seen the example, let's check option D and see how it compares. Isolated. The word isolated means being alone or far away from others. While some settlements might have been far apart, the text actually says this lifestyle led to villages and eventually towns, which are places where people live together, not alone. Being stationary is about staying in one spot, not necessarily being isolated. So, this option is incorrect. The correct answer to this question is C, since this option alone fully and clearly addresses what the question is asking, highlighting the importance of careful reading. On to question number 3. This is a detail question, which means we need to find a specific piece of information mentioned in the second paragraph. According to paragraph 2, what allowed for the emergence of specialized labor? This question focuses on paragraph 2 and asks what allowed for or caused specialized labor. We need to look for a cause and effect structure. In the passage, specialized labor roles are mentioned right after a specific condition is described. Let's find that condition in the text. Let's evaluate option A together, the invention of pottery for storing wild seeds. This option mentions pottery and storing wild seeds. Paragraph 2 does mention pottery for storage, but the text says pottery was a result of specialized labor, not the cause of it. Also, the text refers to cultivating crops rather than just wild seeds. This mixes up the cause and the result. This option is incorrect. Here's option B. Let's break it down. The development of trade with distant regions. This choice talks about trade with distant regions. While trade systems did develop, the passage lists trade as a consequence of having a surplus, just like specialized labor. Trade didn't allow for specialized labor. Rather, they both came from the same source. This option is incorrect. Now let's examine option C, the threat of infectious diseases in crowded areas. This choice mentions infectious diseases in crowded areas. Paragraph 2 mentions infectious diseases as a challenge or a negative result of living in densely populated areas. Disease certainly didn't help create specialized labor. This is a negative outcome, not a facilitating factor. This option is incorrect. Let's evaluate option D and see how it fits. The availability of more food than was immediately needed. This option says having more food than needed was the key. Look at the very first part of paragraph 2, with a consistent surplus of food. A surplus means having more than you need. The sentence continues by saying this was facilitating the emergence of specialized labor roles. This is a perfect match for the question. This option is correct. The correct choice should be marked as D because the context of the passage supports only this option. The other choices involve surface-level reading or misinterpretation. Let's jump into the fourth question. This is an except question, which means we are looking for the one statement that is not true according to the passage. According to the passage, all of the following were challenges of the new agricultural lifestyle except. In this except question, we need to find 3 challenges that are in the text and one that is not. We should look at paragraph 2 and 3 for negative consequences. To solve this, scan the text for words like challenges, vulnerability, or impact. The one choice that isn't mentioned as a problem, or that is actually a positive, will be our answer. Let's evaluate option A together. A decrease in the total human population. This option claims there was a decrease in the population. If we look at paragraph 3, sentence 3, it explicitly says environmental modifications allowed human populations to grow exponentially. Grow exponentially means a huge increase, not a decrease. Therefore, this statement is false based on the passage. Since we are looking for the except, this is our answer. This option is correct. Let's move on to option B, the risk of losing crops due to bad weather. This option mentions losing crops due to bad weather. Paragraph 2 mentions a higher vulnerability to seasonal crop failure. Seasonal failure is usually caused by weather. Since this is in the text as a challenge, it is not our answer for the except question. This option is incorrect. Next, we'll examine option C, the faster transmission of diseases among people. This choice talks about the transmission of diseases. Paragraph 2 explicitly mentions the rapid spread of infectious diseases in densely populated areas. Because this is mentioned as a challenge, we must eliminate it. This option is incorrect. Here's option D. Let's break it down. Increased environmental damage through deforestation. This option mentions environmental damage and deforestation. Paragraph 3 says, vast areas of forests were cleared and the impact was profound and irreversible. This confirms that environmental damage was a result of the revolution. Since it is in the text, it is not the except choice. This option is incorrect. The correct answer is A, because the key expressions in the text directly match this option, while the other choices either provide incomplete information or clearly contradict the passage. Finally, we have arrived at the last question. This one asks about the relationship between 2 specific paragraphs, which helps us understand how the author organized their ideas. What is the relationship between paragraph 2 and paragraph 3? This question focuses on the relationship between paragraph 2 and paragraph 3. Think about the topics. Paragraph 2 talks about social changes like specialized labor and hierarchies. Paragraph 3 starts by talking about the impact on the natural environment. We need an option that correctly identifies this shift in the author's focus. Let's evaluate option A together. Paragraph 3 provides a solution to the problems introduced in paragraph 2. This option claims paragraph 3 gives a solution. Paragraph 2 mentioned problems like disease and crop failure. Does paragraph 3 solve these? No. It actually mentions more issues like forests were cleared. Paragraph 3 describes more consequences, not solutions. This option is incorrect. Next, we'll examine option B. Paragraph 3 shifts the focus from social developments to environmental consequences. This option says the text shifts the focus from social to environmental areas. Paragraph 2 is all about how people related to each other, labor, trade, and hierarchy. Paragraph 3 immediately begins with agricultural practices on the natural environment. This is an accurate description of how the author organized the passage. This option is correct. Now let's examine option C. Paragraph 2 explains the causes of a revolution that paragraph 3 claims never happened. This option says paragraph 3 claims never happened. This is completely false. Paragraph 3 actually talks about the legacy of this revolution. It confirms that the revolution was very real and had lasting effects. The paragraphs agree with each other. They do not contradict. This option is incorrect. Now that we've seen the example, let's check option D and see how it compares. Paragraph 2 and paragraph 3 both argue that hunting was more efficient than farming. This option suggests that hunting was more efficient than farming. However, paragraph 1 said farming allowed for a significantly more stable food supply. While the author mentions challenges, the overall tone shows that farming allowed for civilizations to grow. Neither paragraph argues for a return to hunting. This option is incorrect. Here, the correct option is B, which shows that once we understand the main idea of the text, identifying the correct answer becomes much more straightforward.